studio heads walk into a bar, a series of online conversations where we discuss the business side of running small creative services. I am Souvik. I run a strategic web design and development studio called Miranj.
Hello, I'm Tejas. I run a digital design, experience design studio called Three Sided Coin.
And today at the bar, we have got with us Kalapi Gajjar. Kalapi is a typeface designer and a font engineer. He's a creative director and co founder of Universal Thirst, a typeface design studio specializing in writing systems of the Indian subcontinent. Welcome to the show, Kalapi.
Thank you, guys. Excellent to be here. Love the podcast.
Thank you. So let's dive into the topic of the day, which is having an international outfit for your studio. As studio owners, the thought of incorporating outside India, like most likely in the US, Europe, or business friendly countries like Singapore, often crosses our minds. I know several studios that have thought along these lines, and we are no exceptions. We have ourselves thought of, like, at least dreamt of incorporating outside. And on the face of it, it seems that like having an international outfit can help open the doors to get international clients who obviously have a better pay to give you for your services. And not just that, we've also heard that it's easier to conduct business outside, fewer administrative overheads internationally. You get early access to some of the services that internationally open up, like Stripe. Stripe has recently come in India, but even that is like probably in a beta stage, and only a small number of Indian customers are there. But internationally, it has been around for a while, and we have always envied why do we not have that service. So this conversation should be a good opportunity to validate all these thoughts that we have. Is it really good to have an international outfit or not? And Kalapi, thanks for helping us along in this. So let me start off with this question: that can you give us a short summary of how you position Universal Thirst? Where is it incorporated? Are you an Indian company? Just give us, like, can we call you MNC? How do you
Okay.
position Universal Thirst?
So going back to the history when we set this up, so it was very serendipitous. I was working in the UK from 2012 to 2016 for a design studio, and my now co-founder Gunnar Williamson, who is an Icelandic national, was also working in London for kind of a rival studio. So we were like, he was north of the river, I was south of the river. But what he was a designer, and I mean he was working as a designer there, and I was working as an engineer. So we had different roles, and also the sizes of those companies were vastly different. So the company he was working for is kind of a multi national. It's an MNC essentially. It has a office in Noida. It has an office in Massachusetts. Like it was everywhere. And he what ended up happening is that both of us kind of ended up working on very neutral, very boring typeface design. Like these large corporate briefs that were very bland. They were not boring. They were interesting technologically, because there was this large requirement of multi-script support and stuff like that. So technologically, and kind of from a praxis perspective, it was very complex. But from an aesthetic and visual art perspective, it was not, because it was kind of this thing that needed to work globally, like a very globalized design. So it had to be as neutral as possible and not kind of show out its personality or not have any personality essentially. And being there for over 3 years, we kind of started getting more and more bored with that work. And what we would do is we would work, or we would meet every weekend at like this very hipster bar in East London. And what we were interested in, not really talking about like setting up something together, but we both studied at the University of Reading in the UK, which has a very strong, although this word is not very popular anymore, a non-Latin typeface design um, element to the course. So one of the only courses where you will actually get you be taught the history and the practice of letters that are from other parts of the world and not just the Latin alphabet, right? which is one of the reasons why we attended the course, because I was more interested in, or both of us were kind of interested in that. So kind of continuing that interest through our, you know, corporate lives in London, we would meet every weekend and kind of just discuss history of these letter forms, and go to book fairs or ephemera fairs, or even visit the British Museum on Saturdays and stuff like that, and bring out a 400-year-old book that was printed in Devanagari, or 200-year-old book or manuscript that was printed or handwritten in Devanagari, just to kind of look at it, take pictures and stuff like that. And the idea was always to kind of create some kind of a online resource for designers to get inspiration for, to kind of start other typeface projects, or even understand the typographic you know the typographic history of the scripts, because there's not a lot of that stuff published around. So finally in 2016 we quit. He quit a little bit, I think 2015, like just 3 months before, and then I quit in February of 2016. And we were kind of thrown into this multinational situational thing, because I couldn't stay back with my very unpowerful Indian passport in the UK, so I had to return to India. And Gunnar had a young daughter, so he chose to return to Iceland, not to stay in the UK. And with this very explicit kind of idea that we would collaborate, not as a studio, but we would collaborate on at least creating this, let's say, this repository of knowledge, right? Like we would work on maybe like a publishing platform or something like that, where we can start talking about the history of letter forms, or at least kind of. But what happened was, as soon as kind of the usual people who kind of commission work in typeface design figured out that we were kind of free agents, we started getting requests to do work which was specific with index scripts. And this is very important, because I kind of carved a niche even when I was at Altenberg, to kind of understand the engineering and the production work regarding creating fonts with index scripts. And this is something that is still very, very niche. Like there are not a lot of people who do this work. And it's all, which is why it's always difficult to kind of find designers to create index fonts, because I always say this is like typeface design, for especially for like South Asian writing systems, is kind of a intersection of, and I know this is kind of this very weird tech phrase, but it's like at the intersection of linguistics, programming, and design, right? Because you need to know enough information about scripts and languages. You need to know enough information about fonts as software and all of the programming environment around fonts, as well as actually making nice letter forms, or making letter forms that have function, or kind of solve a specific brief. So it's a very complex place to be in, and it requires the designer to have kind of these interests in all of these different, in these three kind of broad humanist and scientific fields, right? And it's very difficult to find people who are interested in kind of these three things. And it's kind of compounded, the problem is compounded by the fact that it doesn't pay very well. Like there aren't enough jobs. If you are very good at it, it pays tremendously well. But if you're just going to be a designer, not knowing how to really go beyond the design, then you're always stuck at the end of the design concepts phase, and you can't really go forward. And it kind of doesn't is not economically fruitful, and then you abandon it and like look for greener pastures, so to speak, right? Which kind of has ended in us there being very small amount of people who kind of do the engineering part of it, can do the design part of it, can run a business and kind of sustain a business that has that as their primary thing. So as soon as a lot of people found out that we were going our independent route, we started getting bombarded with the idea of, okay, we have these projects, can you please take them up? Because either the other quotes we are getting are kind of insanely high, or we are just not getting enough, there is no availability in the market. So we were like, okay, I think I had significant savings from my time in London, but I didn't want to kind of the idea was, okay, I'll put these savings towards creating this thing, but I was still very young at the time, so I was very naive. Like that was all I had to my name, right? So it was, looking back, it was like very risky thing to do, like just like use all of that money to create this platform that had no return on investment. It was just like this publishing platform with no, the max you could do is maybe ads or somebody to sponsor content or something, which is nothing, right? So we were like, okay, somebody's paying us to do font development work. It's not very glamorous work. It's not, maybe not developing new fonts, but maybe maintaining fonts, bringing quality of existing fonts to a certain level where they can be, they are quality assured to perform in a particular way. So this is stuff that will happen in the background. Our name may or may not be associated with it, or it may be associated to the extent that it's on a GitHub repository somewhere under the contributors markdown file or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, kind of getting a good amount of money, because this is again very kind of niche work that had higher billing rates. So and that work would then fund this other work.
This project.
And that, 6 years down the line has kind of rabbit holed into kind of our primary work. We mainly have, until very recently, only been doing business to business typeface design projects that have been kind of, we've been very lucky to get a lot of work that is kind of business to business in that way. But what's quickly happened, I'm going to try to pull everything back to the business. So what very quickly happened was, we were like, okay, they want to pay us. We don't have, I can't, bill it from my personal account because it's going to be the both of us. So what should we
Mm-hmm.
do? What should we do? So in Bangalore, I started looking for people to help us get incorporated in India. And I
Mm-hmm.
was getting these wild quotes of like 2 lakh rupees and 3 lakh rupees for just incorporation. And they were offering a lot more stuff. It was not just, okay, we'll set up the company, get the name registered, help you with what. But it was still like, seemed like, this doesn't make sense. It's too much
Mm-hmm.
money for very little work. And it was especially shocking because one of the things that I had looked forward to coming to India, again, extremely naive young person in the 20s,
Mm-hmm.
was that despite me being, without like being too political, despite me being, having grown up in Baroda and knowing kind of the politics of Gujarat, it seemed to me, at least from a distance, that there seemed to be some policy making in the center that was trying to make business easy. It at least had the optics in 2016, that there were the optics, were there. So having that in mind, it felt like, okay, this should not be this difficult. Like if they really made it easy to, do something. So anyway, we kept looking for stuff, and I anyway went back, connecting back to Gujarat. I had a friend who had a friend who knew a CA, and we basically incorporated for next to nothing. Right? It was easy to incorporate, and it was very strange because Gunnar needed to incorporate. Gunnar needed to be part of, as director,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a first for that CA to have like an Icelandic national, as, and we had to have another Indian person at that time. It required to so it has to, like, there was there's this, brought back so many of those Guju family business things, because I had to put my wife on as the as the third director. So it was
Yeah.
all of that, all of that weird stuff where she was, like, the share was like, she had like one share, and then we had like
Yeah.
48.5, 48. It was like so
Yeah.
weird to, like, so it was literally not like ease of business. That was a very easy myth, that was a very fast, that was a
Myth
myth that
busting.
disappeared very very
Yeah.
fast, let's say. um, Setting up stuff was easy, and the reason we decided to incorporate in India is because, or decided to transfer or move funds to India, was at the time India had, compared to Iceland, a lower rate of tax, on
Mm-hmm.
a lower rate of corporate tax. There was also the possibility of investing in products that had a longer a larger interest return over a longer period,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't exist in like high human development index countries like
Yeah.
Iceland, where the interest rate on deposits is 0.05%, right?
Yeah.
So that looked a lot more like um,
Financially
tempting for
sensible.
us. Yeah, and so all of this I'm telling you is kind of marred with problems, because while it's very strange, like as a designer we always talk about process, like we're always thinking about process. How do you think about process? Like you're considering every step for your design work, but then I there has never been that thought process towards the business. So it was a combination of me being extremely not interested in that part of the this thing, and also this bombardment of like very complex work coming our way. So it was like, should I be focusing on like the minutia of understanding, okay, whether I do will this help, or compared to like, okay, setting up our own process for our for our like how do we work, and like getting people on board, doing contracts for those people. Like there was just so much stuff happening.
Sorry to step in here, but I think
Yeah,
this will
yeah.
be a great plug for two studio heads walk into a bar. Exactly the kind of problems we were trying to discuss in this conversation.
Yeah.
Would be great to also understand. Go back to the question wherein,
Hmm.
how are you positioned today?
Yeah, yeah. So today we are not a multinational company. The
Okay.
Icelandic, so we are also registered in Iceland.
Okay, that came about
The
later.
Yes, that came about later because we realized that later, which is why I was like getting to it. But it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is an Iceland EHF, like our limited liability company, and then an
Okay.
Indian limited liability company, but they are completely separate. They have no
Okay.
sister ties, nothing. Like we are, Gunnar and I are directors there, and Gunnar, my well, now it's just me and my wife who are the directors in India, and I'll talk about why and what later
Got
on.
that.
But yeah, so that's how they are, and there are no kind of financial ties other than us kind of contracting each other from time to time,
Got
to kind of get paid. It's basically,
Got that. But
yeah.
how would you summarize your core motivation of having an Icelandic incorporation? Is it purely because of the entire administrative overhead and the unexpected amount of bureaucratic systems and policies in India,
Essentially,
or
yes.
is essentially that is why you had
Essentially,
to do it?
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even though, as per the as per the story you were telling, it would have made more financial sense to have things in India,
So
better
yes
interest
and no.
rates.
So better interest rates, but the problem is, one of the problems we figured out very late was that in India having foreign currency accounts is very problematic. So you can have
Yeah.
a foreign currency account, but if you get paid and there is money in the account, at the end of 30 days the money gets converted into INR, and you have no control over that. So let's say the rates drop on that
Yeah.
31st day, we get a
Yeah.
horrible rate for conversion from USD to the other.
Yeah.
And the reason to keep funds in USD is not just for financial benefit. It's also we
Hmm.
collaborate with a lot of consultants abroad, so it's a
Hmm.
way to reduce the amount of conversions of currency we do every time. So if we had a continuous USD account, you could always pay consultants in USD without
Hmm.
having a without having this problem of fluctuation in currency, right? Like you're not
Got that. So
always.
you are working with a lot of consultants abroad as well. So you
Yeah.
basically pay people outside as well.
Yeah,
Got it.
and the problem then, which we realized later, is that import of services attracts another 18% of GST.
Hmm.
So terrible now, especially terrible conversion rates. Uh, a
Hmm.
lot of paperwork in sending money out. Like I really have
Hmm.
to visit the branch every time, and
Hmm.
hand in like six different pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Have like a board resolution every time I'm paying an invoice.
Going back to understanding your core motivation, it was around financial prudence to have it here initially, but then you went back there because there were so many overheads in
Yeah,
terms of just processes that you had to follow. But
yeah.
in all of this, it seems that this was more like a operational decision rather than business wise advantageous decision. So were there any factors, were you looking at any specific business advantages while you were incorporating outside other than these operational aspects?
Yeah, so there were some, there were definitely some advantages that we were thinking about. One of the very important bits is that being part of the Schengen, Iceland is not part of the
Hmm.
Eurozone. So it doesn't have the euro, it has the Icelandic krona.
Okay.
But being part of the Schengen region and being part of the European
Hmm.
Economic Area as a whole
Hmm. Hmm.
means that a company incorporated in Europe has more kind of just basic, just standard trust associated with it, right? There
Got
is this
that.
idea that when we have clients from the US and from Europe, when we have a company registered in Iceland, especially with an Icelandic person as a director, there is kind of this extra layer of trust that, especially with our kind of work, which is extremely complex, and the people commissioning us most often don't know what they are going to get. So they commission us because we consider ourselves, or we position ourselves as experts or specialists in the area, and
Hmm.
kind of expect us to provide the expertise and kind of provide also the education about what they are commissioning us to do,
Hmm.
which is what we kind of are set up to do. But then there is this, then being in Europe helps because it makes, instead of there being kind of an Indian company, which
Hmm.
unfortunately still has kind of some drawbacks where they can't really come up. There are problems with legal aspects where they really can't really do anything, even if you have
Hmm.
contracts and things like that.
Hmm.
The other thing is that it's easier to get liability insurance.
Okay.
So a lot of the clients we work with require us to have liability insurance, which is very high, which we are able to afford.
From the business side of things, what I understand is there is a higher trust in a organization that is incorporated in Europe than an organization that is in India. Plus, there are extra layers of legal situations that I believe international businesses are unwilling to deal with effectively. So, is
especially
this
especially in our context where the size is tiny, where the billables are significantly high, and it's a very complex user space. So I'm thinking that if it was a simpler product or service, I guess the trust would be higher. It's a very contextual
very
thing, but for
specialized
us,
thing?
this is what we have figured out.
Got that. And so you are basically talking about clients who are located in Europe or clients who are located all over the world. And also, as a follow up, what about clients who are located in India? Do you work with them? What is their perception?
Yeah, so we do not have a GST number because we've, in the 6 years of our incorporation, we haven't really worked with any Indian clients. Now, the problem is not that there is no trust, or, I think the problem is that the billables are very high for typeface design projects because the projects are very long, they're very complex, and because we are a team that has designers from all over the world. We have to look at living wages for the person in the most expensive country, and that's where we kind of baseline our billables for, and that's the kind of wages we pay as well. So the wages are kind of also normalized over that. So unfortunately, there isn't still that understanding of the importance of having that IP, of that typeface or font IP, essentially in India, uh, um, in hand in hand with kind of the costs of undertaking something like that. So we've received a lot of requests for quotes, but it's always like ghosted because of that quote amount. And as a result, we've not really had a GST number. We have done we This year we started doing kind of very tiny projects like logo types and stuff like that, and that has kind of been easy to do. It's not really a problem. Yeah, there are no real trust
So
issues there.
when you're taking up these projects which are small from clients in India, do you still baseline it to an Icelandic organization? or
Uh, no. So it's basically depends on what kind of a client it is, what kind of a marketing opportunity we are getting out of it. So this particular client is really, really visual in the Indian market, and we are going to get a lot of visual. Um, it's like paying for views
yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
So
So you'll
we
get a lot
realize
of
that
eyeballs
okay,
to your work.
yeah. So we realized that okay, this was one of the first very significant client where we are going to be able to kind of try to push the marketing as much as possible in order to show our kind of breadth of work. So we decided okay, we could significantly lower our billables in order to get them to do that work, and also because the work was not really very time consuming, so we were able to kind of internally make a case for you know reducing the overheads for it.
All right. So please explain me what is your business development strategy or thinking when you have a multi-country presence?
Hmm.
How do you position this or take advantage of this, or just tell me about the business development strategy?
Yeah, so there is no like if you listen, if you kind of got anything from my kind of that introduction is that there was no real strategy for you know
That's
we
6 years
had
back.
we had yeah no I mean even because the thing is that it was all kind of trial by fire. Like that one project got over, we got like two other projects. Between those two other projects there were more projects, so there was like this, it was just always coming in. We were always kind of scaling, always growing. There were always more people coming, we had to kind of train them. It was like so many things happening at the same time that we had like we really didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But we because we both had I would say significant experience in the business, we knew what were the possibilities. So fonts, there are two basic um, ways that fonts can be marketed. One is business to business, and one is direct to customer. So the way business to business happens is either there is a large brand or a small, well, any size brand that's interested in having their own typeface, which works with their own brand identity and their own, and they want to do that because it gives them an exclusive. It's another kind of language that they're speaking with the client, with their customers, right? And it gives them that kind of visual edge compared to their in the marketplace compared to the other clients. Mostly it's a very expensive undertaking, so there's always medium to large clients that kind of are able to support this, right?
Yeah,
So that's one way of doing things. The other way of doing things is there are existing fonts and people will just buy them. It can be one
yeah.
individual user. It can be a Fortune 500 company that buys like license for a website, which is a huge license. There can be product companies that embed the fonts. So there is like an embedding license. So there are like multiple licenses that are based on existing products. So there are these
Hmm.
two large things. Now, we've always wanted to get into the second kind, like the business to direct to customer,
Hmm.
but we've never had the time to make those fonts, right? Until
Yeah.
now, which I'm going to talk about. But
Okay.
those fonts were always like, from the very beginning, we were very kind of inspired by Google's 20% project idea,
Yeah. Yeah.
where we spent like one day of the week just working on our passion project essentially. So a lot
Hmm.
of the fonts that are now available, www.universalthrust.com,
Hmm.
I have kind of been built over multiple Fridays over the last 6 years.
Hmm.
Not just Fridays, of course. A lot of people work like full time as well when we had the time to
Hmm.
do it. So we were able to build that IP on the side to be able to. Positioning in the market was easy for the first kind of business because we have this very very tight niche. So we
Hmm.
always got this. Okay, we are looking for fonts to support Indian scripts,
Hmm.
and this kind of works hand in hand. We are kind of again serendipitous with the time where there is this next billion user movement, right? Where
Yeah.
the West, the amount of users in the Western Hemisphere is saturated, and now the
Hmm.
next user base is going to come from the East. So as a
Right.
result, you also need to build localization accessibility for people who are non-English speakers. and that primarily means fonts. So there is now a
Mhm.
lot of people who say, okay, now we want fonts. Where do we go? So then we are kind of then seen as one of the people who are able to help them, and that's where we get the business to business part of it.
So that's also
Yeah.
where the fact that you're located in multi geography, and the fact that you're doing fonts which are specific to the index scripts probably would help, right?
Yeah, so
Bec-
it de facto helps. It was not
yeah,
again, it was not like a strategic decision to put people
it
around the
just
globe,
happened. Yeah.
but it just happens. That way, people are able to take calls from from clients all over the world at all times of the day, because there's somebody always up when a call needs to be done. Yeah, but there is no method to the madness. It was basically like it grew. uh, Typeface design can be done out of a laptop. So
Hmm.
we were kind of remote workers pre-pandemic. There was no, moving to the remote working model or whatever. And that has kind of has its benefits and also its drawbacks, because typeface design is extremely visual. You want to
Hmm.
teach people that are working with you. You want to constantly give feedback, and online is not really the best way to give feedback, because you want to be in the same room. You want to kind of point out things and all, which are not really very easy to do. They're easy enough, but not and then I remember when I was in London, if I had an issue, I could just move to my mentor,
Next
like
table.
go to my mentor and say, hey, this is not working.
Yeah.
Now here it's like get on a Slack call, share my screen. It's possible, but it is time consuming, more complex. So
I
it
assume
has its
COVID would have trained all of us to get a little
yeah,
more normalized to this way of working, which we were never used to before.
yeah. So to answer your question, the being in Europe doesn't give you a edge just because, but there are these tiny things like more trust. We are able to get some of the financial things in place. Like in Iceland, we are able to get a perpetual US dollar account. That way, we can keep when we get paid in US dollars or in euros or in pounds, we can keep the money in that currency, and then we are able to pay all the contractors in that currency. So there is all of those benefits that we get from being in Iceland. So those are all kind of small benefits that we've learned over time, that we are able to kind of
All right. Very connected to this, which means you've already said that you work with collaborators or with consultants outside India. So, uh, what are the ways in which having an international entity might help you in working with international consultants, aside from the fact that this point which has already been touched, where you can have a foreign currency bank account. Other
yeah.
than that, do you believe collaborators have a greater trust as well, or is it easier to do that, or is it harder, especially if you're working with Indian collaborators?
Yeah, so we have two types of consultants that we work with. Actually, let's say three types of consultants. So one is kind of a studio member who is full time exclusively working on projects with us. They can be in, there are some of them in India. There's one in Portugal, one in one in Switzerland. So they're like all over the one in Prague as well. So they're all over the place. There are some that are part time. So there are some that work just 2 days a week, non exclusive, just like working 2 days a week or 3 days a week, helping us with a specific script because they have knowledge in a specific script and they are excellent designers, with that particular script and all of that. So that there is that, and then there is the third kind, which is consultants that give us feedback on our work. So like visual feedback on design and stuff like that. So there is this. Um, One of the benefits of having kind of this consultants all over is that, of course, we get an extremely diverse workforce. So we are able to kind of partake in everybody's joys and sadnesses and everything, and we know what it is to be like well, somewhat, not like really, but what it is to be like a designer in Portugal, what it is to be like a designer or an Indian living in Prague, and we get these stories. We get it becomes like this nice big community that's everywhere. When someone is visiting them, they can stay with them, things like that. So there is that kind of culture and human aspect to it. The other aspect to it is that they all we do not have like a very structured leave policy and kind of those kind of HR policies. So people can work on their times. Again, this is extremely contextual because typeface design is a very elongated work
Yeah.
system. Like it takes years to finish projects. So we have kind of
Mhm.
very kind of stretched out, timelines and things like that. So we are essentially working just continuously over long periods of times, and that kind of affords us kind of a degree of freedom where the person can be off, like let's say like a few weeks at a time, and kind of do take a break or whatever, so that they don't get burnt out. There is that. It's a good thing for us because they are in different parts of the world. They all kind of represent us in conferences that are happening everywhere, so they go and either
Oh,
attend
yeah.
it or they are speaking there, or instead of us kind of spending that carbon tax and actually traveling
Hmm.
to somewhere, they're like locally
Yeah.
located designers. So that, and then the financial aspect where it's easy to pay, it's easy to kind of do all of these things. So that kind of creates a good studio environment where not everybody is required to be in Bangalore, required to come into the studio.
Hmm.
You know, yeah.
If I turn this around and say, if Universal Thirst was an Indian company only,
Mhm.
other than the fact that you can't like have a dollar or a foreign currency account, which of the other benefits that you are getting right now would have been inhibited, and you wouldn't have been probably be able to do it? Could you have hired someone in Prague and in Portugal while sitting here in India only?
I think the company culture would have stayed the same. I think the company
Hmm.
culture won't change because it's just how we are. Because
Hmm.
Gunnar would continue to stay in Iceland, although he would.
Hmm.
I know he's like an Indophile and spends like comes 4 times a year to India. He was just in Kerala doing a surfing retreat. But yeah, so I think the culture wouldn't change. It's only the financial aspects and the administration aspects that make it extremely problematic, where there is so much red tape in
Hmm.
sending money abroad. It makes us
Hmm.
lose money, plus we pay a GST which we're not really getting any benefits out of because we don't have
Yeah.
local clients and things like that. So that is enough for a company of our size, like a 10-person company, to be a
Hmm.
big thorn in the backside to not be here.
Hmm. What about being able to attract talent? Would that have been inhibited if you were just a India only studio?
um I don't know. I don't think so. Again, this is very, very contextual because again, typeface design is very, very, very specific. And I know a lot of typeface designers who are not Indian,
Mhm.
um, are now, there is a trend over the last 10 years specifically because of the design course at Reading that promotes designing for scripts from around the world, that a lot of like these designers have their minds opened up and their kind of context opened up, and they're like, oh wow, there is this huge world of typography outside of this very Eurocentric, you know Swiss typography thing. And then they are like, okay, I do not want to do this very Eurocentric thing. I want to work with scripts of the world, kind of scripts that have been neglected, to be able to. And I don't want to kind of act as if there is no financial gain out of it. Of course, there is financial gain because it's a niche. So if you are able to exploit the niche, you're able to also make money out of it. But for the most part, I think there is never kind of an evil intention. Oh, I'm going to be this white savior, go and save your
Mhm.
state. Although there are people. I don't want to say that there aren't people who do that. There are people who get in with those intentions by doing like, I want to kind of support the typography, but then over time become this kind of, no, I've been doing this for 10 years. I know better than you kind of thing, which is like in every, like
Yeah.
X for Twitter, like the design Twitter or like type Twitter or whatever. There is always that kind of weirdness. But because we are kind of this multi, because if we would have been situated in India, and the idea was, no, you have to come to India, there would be a lot of people from Europe and the US would love to do it, because that's the
Okay.
whole idea, right? If you're developing scripts for Devanagari or
Yeah.
developing typefaces for Devanagari Gujarati, what better way to do it than to just
Then being
live in the
there.
culture and doing that? So I would say that there would not be a lot of people who would do it, but I think the people who want to work with us
Hmm.
would at least be willing to come here, spend at least 6 to 8 months or be full time, and then maybe some would say, okay, I've been here for a year, I don't really like it, I'll go back, and then we would be able to do remote. But then if you put in a another qualifier that no, you have to be in India, then of
Yeah.
course we would lose that talent, right? Like it would
That's
not be.
absolutely
Yeah,
completely understandable. But again, you're actually bringing out something very specific, that your work and the service you provide is so specialized and also in a way related to the scripts that are locally around in India. That kind of makes it easier, and that automatically acts as an incentive in a way for people to come in India and do the work. But that may not be true for some of the other design services which
yeah.
are not India specific, in which case moving to India or working with an Indian studio will have raised different questions. So
Also,
I
let
guess
me
I
say,
guess
also
yeah.
let me say, this is still very idealistic, right? Like,
Yeah.
we are happy to have people from anywhere. Again,
Yeah.
another problem is the administration problems. Now, this is not only in India.
Hmm.
Having people from, having non-Indians to come and work in India, the last time I checked, you had to pay them $25,000 a year as a
At
salary.
least. Yeah. This actually ties very well, Kalapi, to the next section where I want to actually talk about the administrative overheads. And you've touched this, so let's actually go for this, because
Yeah.
if I have to boil this question down to, does having this international outfit mean more administrative work for you as business owners? And what does it look like? What does the admin overhead look like? We've talked about it a little bit, but this is where we can dive deep in all the different things.
Yeah, so we don't have. I must say that I'm happy to say that we don't really have a lot of admin. Okay, I'm going to divide it into two because there are two entities, right? So
Yeah.
also let me say that at this point of time, the Icelandic entity is kind of the main entity. The Indian entity exists because we have about four designers working out of India, and then my wife and I, who are kind of directors in India. Like, even though my wife, is not a contributing director directly, she helps me from with admin stuff from time to time, but she's not really a like a directly contributing director. But what it helped us to do was to get all of the payments for these contractors into India, and to kind of then be able to keep that year's budget in India, keep it in a low risk fund that was, that would appreciate over time. And we were not really a lot, but at least instead of sitting in US dollars not doing anything, it would at least appreciate a little bit over a period of time. And then ease of paying everybody is easy because we are transferring from like an HDFC account to another HDFC account or another
Hmm.
NEFT transfer, which is easier to do. The I must say that ease of doing business in Iceland, I have not seen, as easy of kind of corporate affairs anywhere else. Not that I know of stuff all over the world, but I know for a fact that even opening businesses in the UK and running them are very, very complex, like the double taxation problems. There is, I mean, they invented our red tape, so there is,
Mm.
while there may be some of, it's not, it sounds like a joke, but it is not really. Like, they may have excellent UI and like excellent looking systems in place,
Yeah.
like gov.uk and all of that,
Yeah.
like looks very good. But when you actually go down to the brass tacks, it's all, this, like, you have to go from here, then you have to go there, then you have to like submit paperwork, even though it is like digital paperwork, but you have to submit paperwork to. It's ridiculous. Like, we have collaborators in the UK, like non-consultant collaborators,
Hmm.
who we were having this discussion with, and they were having the worst time, especially post Brexit, and like, post GDPR, to kind of create. Or so, uh, I remember when I literally set up my bank account. We literally set up the business in like a working day.
Mhm.
Anything we need to do, we just need to call up our representative at the business affairs ministry, and
Mhm.
it's a representative again. Iceland is 300,000 people. It's
Mhm.
less than the population of Indranagar, right?
Mhm.
So obviously administration is easier,
Mhm.
and it's easier to get in touch with a human that will help you out, with any administrative hurdles that you. But having said that, that's the benefit that we are getting, right? That's what we kind of,
But you're
yeah,
actually having to bear the administrative overhead, and I'm talking about specifically you, because you are located here in India, and
yeah,
you are also a part of two different incorporations. One is
yeah.
outside and one in India. So you are, I would assume that no matter how easy it is there in Iceland, you're still having to bear Iceland plus India any which ways, uh, as a sum total of admin work to be done.
Yeah, so in my case, I don't have to do any of the Icelandic admin work, because unlike in India, where you need both the directors to sign on everything, you need DIN numbers, you need all kinds of things. In Iceland, Gunnar just handles everything, and there is really nothing to do to handle. Like we have a tax person who does our taxes and files the taxes and does the compliance, and that is essentially it. We really don't have to go to the government to do anything, other than when I need to get a visa, a documentation for my visa. Then I need to
Mhm.
get like the incorporation papers, the latest incorporation papers from the
Mhm.
ministry. That is again all online, so it takes him 3 seconds to just go to the thing, put in our. So in India, what happens is I have to do a lot of, yes, of course I need to do a lot of admin work. Most
Mhm.
of that admin work is the payments to the contractors, is the TDS and all of that.
Mhm.
There is not a lot more than that, because again we are like a very tiny team, so we're not
There'll
really
be at least
doing.
yearly two filings and things like
Yeah,
that. That
yeah,
you
yeah,
might be using the services of a CS or a CA,
yeah, yeah,
but it still needs sometimes your digital signatures or your physical signatures,
yeah.
or at least your review, if not anything else.
Yeah. So that, and then this is where I'm going to like throw the bombshell and like surprise you. So I am kind of relocating to Canada at the end of this year. So
Okay.
essentially our business strategy now is that I kind of become a traveling director in
Mhm.
Iceland. So now all of the Indian contractors' payments will essentially also come from Iceland, which is extremely easy, because the contractor payments are already automated from Iceland.
Yeah.
Like there are like, the internet banking there is like
Much better.
probably decades ahead of India. And of course it means that the people who are in India have to kind of answer the bank's call every time there is a payment
Yeah.
they
Why are you
receive.
getting this payment?
Yeah, but that is
Explain.
not that is not our administrative issue. That is an
Yeah.
administrative issue. Then the
So
contractors.
effectively, this is almost like this is an organization that started off trying to incorporate in India, went
Yeah,
ahead and incorporated in Iceland, and slowly moved the bases there. And now
yeah,
it's saying that we'll try to eliminate even further
yeah.
business overheads that are there in India as we move forward.
Yeah, so we are
I
trying to eliminate that, because I think there are fewer benefit. If I were to continue staying in India, I think I would continue the incorporation, because there are some
Mhm.
kind of tax challenges and tax benefits that you get over
Mhm.
having, being
Mhm.
incorporated here instead of just getting paid directly.
Yeah,
Which is something I will also have to think about in Canada. Obviously, I won't be able to do a sole proprietorship, and that's
but this is a
only because of,
personal move, right?
yeah, this is a
Or
personal move.
not
Yeah.
a business related move necessarily.
No,
It's
no,
a
no, not a
personal move.
business
Got
related
it.
move. Yeah,
Got it.
personal.
When you're running an outfit of this size, are anything not personal and not business together?
Yeah. I was just
can,
thinking that when you were
can
saying, is this a
anything be
personal
purely
move?
personal or purely business?
Purely business.
Yeah,
No, I don't think so. Fair enough.
yeah,
Thanks for correcting me, Tejas.
yeah,
There. Okay, so if you have two entities, one
yeah,
international and one Indian, which have no relation, at least from a incorporation point of view, there is obviously common individuals located across. How do payments happen from one entity to here? Is it like a service that the Indian entity provides to the international entity?
Yeah, it's essentially that. It's
It's
essentially the
essentially
Indian
that.
Indian Indian studio, the Icelandic studio subcontracting the Indian studio to
Got that. Got that. Okay.
do
Uh,
some of its things, because it's again because of the distribution of funds. It has
yeah.
nothing to do with anything other than just that.
Yes, makes
Yeah,
sense. Makes sense. I was just trying to understand how the administrative thing
yeah,
works. Uh, if you have an international incorporation, do you think that it would have been possible if you wouldn't have a partner who is living in Iceland? Like, can our studios, Tejas's and mine, just imagine that, hey, it's so attractive. Like, Kalapi has said that everything is easier, just 300,000 people over there, we are sitting over here. Can we, on the click of a button, 3 seconds, have a business running in Iceland?
yeah. So there are a lot of countries that you can do that, right? Like UK, you can like literally do open a business in 20 minutes. Like there are so many services. There are kind of a Baltimore business. There is, like you said earlier in the thing, the Singapore thing. We really did think about all of this. The problem was there were always like these small catches everywhere, right? Like one thing was there is a certain there's a certain uneasiness that you're not there, right? So there is always this thing that, okay, you don't know anything about that country, you don't have a physical presence there, and that kind of adds, even if it adds like a 3% anxiety to your total decision making, it still does that, right? In Singapore, again, I may be wrong on a lot of these things, because this may be true. When I was asking for it, asking for this information or looking for it, I may be given wrong information. But in Singapore, for example, you need to have a 1% ownership by a local Singaporean, right? Now this
Yeah.
is, how does this translate to owning the business? Do you really want, I know that they've simplified it to a point where your chartered accountant can be that 1% or whatever, but what does that mean? Like, you don't know how big you are going to become, how small you're going to be. What does that 1% actually translate to, not just in terms of money, but in terms of, just the functional
Yeah.
ownership being there? So that was one thing that we were very kind of uncertain about. In the UK, it was, we were incorporating at the time that the Brexit stuff was already starting to take very strong ground, and we were like, I don't think we can, even trust this process, because it's,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what deals they are going to make with the different countries, with the European Union, all of the so that was out, even though it was super easy. And the
Okay.
US, we didn't really even think about, because there was this double taxation stuff. I know there are ways to avoid the double
Mm-hmm.
taxation stuff, but we were like, all of these benefits that Gunnar, or we got as Gunnar, being a local resident,
Mm-hmm.
being part of the European Economic Area, being physically present there, even though he in the long term, hopes to relocate outside the country. But because even doing business from outside the country is so easy,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of, I think Iceland, there are ways for you to be a non-resident and have, which is why we also have, actually India has a significant embassy in Iceland. So I think you
Mm-hmm.
should, if you are interested, maybe you can think about it. It's not very difficult, and like I
You're
said,
saying that it's a route that may be explored,
yeah,
that
that
one could try to
definitely,
explore.
yeah. Anywhere else
Okay.
in Europe. The other thing is, Iceland is also very, very English speaking, so you can do a lot of the stuff in English compared to a lot of other European countries, like, like Germany and all. They, of course, English speaking, but a lot of the contract work, a lot of the stuff is very, very strongly in German. So you either need to, have like a local lawyer or somebody that's converting everything, telling you, okay, this is what it is. There is this added advantage of Iceland having this very strong English speaking thing.
All right. So two very short, direct questions before I move to the closing part of our conversation.
Yeah.
One is that you spoke about double taxation.
Mm.
By having an organization in Iceland and having a separate organization in India, you're still being double taxed in a way. Is that accurate? for me to say that?
Yeah, yes, we
Okay.
are being double taxed. Yeah, and that's a yeah,
That's a cost you're willing to pay.
that's a cost we are willing to pay, and that's a cost we are going to stop paying soon. That's one of the reasons
Yes,
why we
that's
are.
that's one of the big
Yeah,
reasons why you would be there. Got that.
yeah,
Also, when you have, if you think of having an international outfit as opposed to just an Indian outfit, by what, how much factors do you think the administrative cost increases? Because obviously the fee for incorporation to yearly maintaining that organization, there's a cost attached to that.
yeah.
Is that significantly higher? At what? How would you compare it?
Yes, so the compliance and stuff is significantly higher costs in Iceland compared to India. But I see, I'll be very clear. I'll be very frank, not clear. If I have to go to the bank with one document that talks about board resolution to
Mhm.
pay thing, submit our, it's a lot of privacy breaches. Like,
Mhm.
not privacy breaches, there are lots of, you're opening a lot of your stuff to you're
A
opening a lot
banker.
of private stuff to an entity that you cannot wholly trust. Okay, of
Yeah.
course it's a bank, but every time I had to, so in the first 2 years when I actually had to pay, when we were getting payments in India, and then I had to pay even Gunnar, right, from here in the first like 6 7 months that we were
Mhm.
processing all the payments out of here. I had to give our contract to the bank with whichever consultant. I had to give them a copy of the invoice, right?
Mhm.
All of this may not seem like major privacy breaches, but they are. Show
Absolutely.
you are telling people how much you charge for things, and the bank may not, but you don't know how they're holding this information. Whether that they're making that information available to other third parties. So there is a lot
Mhm.
of, then you have to, like, get two tax from a lawyer, from your
Mhm.
CA, like a I may be butchering this, but I don't know, like CACB, once
Yes. 15
like a
CSCB.
CA 15 CACB, like two,
Yeah.
and that is time sensitive, and like, you have to get it done exactly within the time that you're. So all of this and running the studio, I think the costs of just spending this time are the same amount of costs essentially, because if I have a studio cost, in like $120 an hour, if I'm spending
Mhm.
$120 an hour doing this, getting this
Mhm.
paperwork. And see, we are not big enough to have like a full-time person to do this, right? We don't have
Yeah.
like a accountant in the studio, or like a general man Friday, or a woman Friday, or a person Friday who will do this
Mhm.
stuff. Then that's me doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then that is my $120 an hour
Being spent.
going for 2 days doing this. And I would rather like doing an internal training workshop, or like actually doing development work than doing this. And then that is what I consider as the costs, total costs,
Absolutely.
rather than just how much I'm
Absolutely.
paying.
The overhead of sending one international remittance, which I have to do for one of our consultants who is located outside, is just painful.
Yeah,
Painful to the point that we said that we won't do it monthly, we do it once in 2 months, and if we
yeah,
can reduce that more, like those
yeah,
13 odd signatures, and you have to physically submit these papers to
yeah.
the bank in case, it's crazy.
And I've had
Anyhow,
so many instances where they are like coming back to me saying, this is like not acceptable in this
yeah,
format. Can you say so? And that is like 5 days after I've been to. So
yeah,
not only is that contractor now been waiting for 5 days for the payment, now that process is going to be starting again after 5 days. So it's like just, and then let's say the markets dip, and now I'm paying 3 rupees more per dollar that I'm
yeah.
sending. It's like just ridiculous amount of standard
Not
thing. Yeah,
efficiency, like
yeah,
lack of efficiency.
Yeah, but apparently, from what I've seen, we have a client in Canada who has to do transfer to us, and he pretty much goes through the same routine. Like he messages me that I'm now walking to the bank because I have to make your transfer, and I'm like,
mm,
how? Because I don't have to make any international transfer, so I'm totally oblivious to that process,
right.
and I'm like, how is banking in 2022, even in a country like Canada, at this stage where you have to actually walk up to a bank to make an international remittance? So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's
Yeah. So I'm not going. We are not going to be moving our business operations to Canada at any point.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not this
Even in
difficult. I
US,
mean,
I think I've
yeah.
had clients who are like, oh, we have to go to the bank for Swift transfer. So I think
yeah.
it's
Okay.
quite bad everywhere.
Yeah,
This
it's
piece,
not
but
like this. It's not like this in Iceland at all. I think
Iceland at all.
Gunnar does it on his mobile,
Yeah.
Perfect.
literally. Like
Wow.
it's
That's
it's not.
amazing.
Yeah, he does it on the app. It's like excellent.
Okay, I'm trying to get to the closure of this conversation where
Yeah,
the pains of sending a remittance abroad are felt by, say, Kalapi, you, I am feeling it. Not everyone feels that because they don't have to go through that. So, at what point of time would you recommend a creative service agency, any design agency, can be type design, can be web design, can be product design, anything like that? At what point would you recommend them to explore setting up internationally? What should be the criteria one should think of, like international clients, foreign remittances, XYZ? Then think about it. What would be your answer?
yeah. It's very difficult for me to answer it because I've never been in the position. I've never been in that position. I would say that I think we've become. I think I think we've more and more become internationally present. Like people have become. I, I've seen this very crazy trend amongst visual artists and designers in India, at least, that they're more and more not willing to work with Indian clients, like
Hmm.
good designers, like people who don't have the choice, they will of course continue to work with Indian clients. I'm not talking about you, Tejas. I'm just talking about this very kind of monolithic, these people who have a very strong
Yeah.
personality, like they are
Yes.
single
Yes.
person
Yes.
studios
Yes.
who
Yes.
have this, very strong
Very
design
strong,
personality.
strong visual voice. Yeah.
And they just say no, like they just
Yeah.
say no, I just don't have the availability. I think that's
Correct.
like a polite way to say no, I'm not
Yeah.
interested in
Yes.
working with you.
Totally. Totally.
But so I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No.
I
No.
would say that if you as either an individual or as a studio has been able to crack into a particular market, a particular Western Hemisphere market, where there seems to be a good promise of really getting more work. Because I think there are two aspects of competitiveness as Indian studios. If you really up your quality of work and you're like at the world stage with what you offer with competitive prices, like, this is the last thing I want to say. I don't want to really charge less than what my counterpart in Silicon Valley is charging, but there are certain kind of, equalizing truths where when you want to your, you know this should never be kind of a, and I mean we are trying to do this, but it's not sustainable. But there are kind of baseline costs that you incur as somebody in India. Like they're not as much as if you were in San Francisco, right?
The
So you
purchasing power
have
difference is there. Yeah.
you have the kind of ability to say, okay, if this studio in London is going to charge the client £100 for this project, I can charge £70, and I can kind of enter this sphere where now I can talk about this huge project I did, right? So that when you are able to like break into that market, and then eventually of course move your way up to that 100 and even 120, maybe charge more than what those guys charge. But when you're able to essentially figure out that, okay, all my work is coming from or going to come from there, think about having a local presence there.
Okay.
um, but it's very difficult for me to answer that because what are you going to then run your operations from here? Like let's say you grow to a degree where you now have like a HR department, like even if it's one person HR department, you have like
Mhm.
a accounting department. What do you do with that? Do you like have also a accountant, freelance accountant from XYZ country that's helping you doing that, and then have a local person to pay, because it becomes like our complex entity where we are like this two, like there is this wall between the two entities, even though we are kind of connected in a way that, we are directors, and then also the work, also the funds are being transferred because they are being shared for projects, right? I don't really have a very clear answer. I think if you are planning to relocate personally,
Yeah,
for various reasons, that may be a good reason also. But I know of also several people who have relocated personally but are incorporated in India for some
probably
reason.
just
I don't
trying
know.
to
Yeah,
avoid the administrative
yeah.
cycle again. And
But
you
you
know, the
are
Indian,
local. But you are, once you cross 170 days, you become tax resident. So it's not, you are, filling taxes locally one way or the other. So there is administrative over it. It may not be like corporate taxes, but you are still going to be doing some.
I believe the Indian incorporation system scars you
Hmm.
enough that you don't want to actually get
Yeah,
incorporated again ever, because you're again thinking back the same thing, almost like
yeah,
uh,
I would say that
remembering that.
I think after you, I think in the closing thing for that particular question would be that after you go over a particular billable amount
Yeah,
per year, I
yeah,
think it doesn't matter. Like you should just
go for
you
something
just
like that.
go and if if it just benefits you to be in Singapore, and that 1%, you give somebody, or they own whatever, and it doesn't matter to you, you're at a
Yeah,
level where that 1% is of no consequence to you, or at least mentally gives you the satisfaction that it has
yeah,
no
yeah,
consequence to you, just go
yeah,
for it,
yeah.
right?
Call it call it a mental peace tax, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it is all about that. I think one of the
yeah.
things that we have a lot of people like you and me, because we are like small business owners essentially. We are small business owners, but we want to be big. I mean, not want to be big business owners, but we always have these aspirations of being large, successful businesses that can be sustainable, right?
Yeah.
But our unfortunately, in our unfortunately or fortunately, I guess, in our on the back of our minds, the examples are these like large successful
Corp.
people,
Yeah,
Yeah,
but we never realize or never get or understand the mental the effect on mental health that has had to people who run those corps, right? Maybe those people are, have the mental fortitude to do it. We don't want to deal with, like babus and bad processes and things like that, while we want to be successful. So I
yeah,
think ideally it would be reassess that holistically, see where you are. After COVID also, a lot of things have become, for me personally, have kind of, there are lots of realizations of, what is life in a way. I know it sounds very philosophical and very whatever, but it is real, right? Like when we were in the
absolutely.
middle of the second wave, we had no idea we are going to make it, right? Like everybody was dying around us, left, right, and center. So then what is, if we have come out of it, do we just forget that fragility that is not just physiological life but also mental,
Hmm.
this idea of dealing with this, that if something like this comes again in the next 5 years, what does that mean? Like just what does it mean to my life, right? So I think there are a lot of people who will like grab that opportunity and like be, capitalist 100%, and like
Hmm.
make the most out of it, get as much cash out of it, whatever. And then there are people like me who, do understand the place of capitalism and benefit from it, of course, to a large extent, but I'm happy to pay 40% taxes in Canada and have like a 20-minute access to the mountains and forget about, and having a small business, not worry about scale, whatever, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
okay to
yeah,
me. And that's a
yeah.
very
I
personal decision
Right.
to
Yeah.
make.
I think to me, like the difference there is uh, something Souvik and I were just chatting about right before this call. Is we all want to build these businesses and become successful based on certain skill sets, certain technical or creative skill sets. But we, not all of us may be equally prepared, like say the bigger businesses, in dealing with all the other hassles and mental stress that comes around with dealing with bureaucracy and like spending actual time, like you were saying, you $120, if you are counting it that way, that you have to do it doing some administrative work. but you would be rather spending that time doing some productive work internally with the team. Although doing certain administrative works may have a long term or might be just one time activity that pay for a long period of time, but you just don't want to do it because you are coming from a mental model where you want to build things based on your skills and not necessarily even understanding that how much more bureaucracy is going to bring into the work. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like the whole mental, whether you want to pay that 1% in Singapore and then just focus on the fruits of it, right? Like that, what positives it brings into your life. Yeah,
And what that fruit means to you, like what
yeah,
is that, like is
yeah,
that fruit, like I said, lesser total profits in the bank, but
yeah, yeah,
more guaranteed healthcare, more access to open spaces, more
yeah, yeah.
access to, like just good quality of life, rather than having a fruit that is, I'm going to own a $10 million house and live in it, like that. There are, of course, and that's a decision, that's a private and personal decision that
Right.
you as a small
Right.
business owner.
All right. Thanks a lot, both of you, for that last closing conversation and leaving us with thoughts like, what is the mental peace tax you're willing to pay in order to have in order to have a saner quality of life and quality of mental health uh, for you. Just to summarize all the conversation that we had today, we few things to keep in mind are what kind of trust levels you can build if you're outside the country, incorporated outside the country rather than in India, because there are some international clients who would just not want to engage with the red tape that is there in India or pay for that red tape that is there in India. Have to keep in mind what the wages internationally are, because if you have some international presence, then you'll have to pay internationally, and therefore your costs have to breach a certain, or your billing has to breach a certain amount in order to actually maintain an international outfit. And also, one of the big things was that the fact that when you get to keep your money in foreign exchange, in foreign currency rather, then it helps you, it costs much lesser in case you have to pay in foreign currency to consultants abroad. So that's one more factor to have some an international outfit. And also, when you're trying to pick a different country, language plays an important role as well, because you would want to pick a country where you can easily read the policies and all, and you don't need a third language or a fourth language understanding to engage with that country. I think these are some of the highlight points that had come out for me, other than the final closer, final conversation around how can you achieve mental peace by avoiding red tape or avoiding bureaucracy and avoiding a lot of mental hassle. I think, and that this can be a means to achieve it. And yes, there are costs attached to it. My final question before we end this recording, Kalapi, would be, when will the original repository project that you were thinking of, when will that come out? And where can we get to see your fonts that you're putting out for D2C people, for direct to consumers?
That's an excellent question, and that repository is already out. You can go to gazette.universalthirst.com. Uh, uh, it was excellent because we had, I will say and I will claim that this ease of work that everybody has attracted, or we have kind of mutually found people that are extremely enthusiastic about the work they do when they're working with us, or just generally. And all of the building blocks for the repository was there because we kind of built those building blocks on those Sundays, but they were like part of, either like Google Sheets or Dropbox. There was like content everywhere. It required like one person. It required us to have some some time to kind of put all of this together, and we found this one person, Salome, who joined our team last year, who was also very enthusiastic of getting this platform out there. So when we launched our website in May, universalthirst.com, we also launched the Gazette, which is kind of our publishing platform where we talk about design histories and typographic design histories of both Iceland and India. So there are lots of articles that we published. We also kind of also kind of bring out our collection. So Gunnar and I collect a lot of typographic history. So we have this feature where we'll bring out one piece of design, so it can be a publication or like an actual object, and then talk about its design history and how it's affected like visual culture, whatever. And those kind of things are up there already. So that's universalthirst.com, and if you go to universalthirst.com, you can, there's a link to the Gazette. You can go and read all of the articles, and yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing all your ideas around having an international outfit. I know several organizations want to who have dreamt of setting up something outside, but they have not done it. And the two of us here in the conversation are exactly that at that level right now. So thanks, Kalapi, for lending us your insights on this
Most
subject.
welcome.
And to our audience, hope you enjoyed this episode of Two Studio Heads. Please follow us on @2studioheads on Twitter and send in your feedback and suggestions. If you'd like to participate in a future conversation or suggest topics or guests to us, please reach out to us via Twitter. Thank you and have a nice day.